Our theme for 2025 is engaged, Canyon engaged. Last year we did praise, and we're not going to give that up. We're going to keep praising God, right? But this year it's engaged, and the next 2 weeks, in fact, this whole month, the rest of this month, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for you to get engaged. The first one being the ministry fair. The next 2 weeks after church, we will have tables set up with, look at all of these ministries. There's something for everyone. Find something to show this church that you love the people that you worship with. It's important. The next one, I don't want to pick up any of these after church. Not because I'm lazy, but because you all know someone, neighbor, family, friends, who needs to come to the Canyons Couples Workshop. You notice we called it couples and not married workshop? That's because we wanted to invite Preston and Aaron. We like them so much. But in reality, we wanted to invite Preston and Aaron. If people are dating and are serious about that, this is going to be invaluable as they start their life together. Dan May is coming to speak to us. He's got just a plethora of knowledge. You know what? The sign up is easy. It's a free lunch. You don't have to buy a timeshare. Take these. Don't leave these. Find someone to give it to. In the year 2000, there was a major submarine accident. A Russian sub by the name of the Kursk had an explosion, and it sank, and it killed all 118 crewmen. But for a while, there were 23 men that were surviving in this chamber of the submarine for several hours at the bottom of the ocean floor after the explosion. And one of them was this 27-year-old captain named Dmitry Klishkinov. And he wrote a note to his wife while he waited to die. And two words from that note were displayed in a black frame next to his coffin at his funeral service. Mustn't despair, he wrote. Mustn't despair. And it's not clear from the note who the words are for. It may be that he was telling himself, hey, keep hope up, maybe the rescue is coming. Maybe it was, hey, there's hope for a life after this. Or maybe he was telling his wife that once he leaves, she mustn't despair. For a 27-year-old Russian sailor whose life was suddenly and unexpectedly ended at the bottom of the ocean, those are his last words, mustn't despair. And it's a strange thing. A few human beings, not many, but occasionally there's a situation where people will know they're going to die. They know. And not this longer term, but like very quickly, they're going to die. And there was a Time essay about this, and it's this almost intrinsic thing that happens in people. In that moment, people inherently want to send a message. They want someone to know their story. Passengers on a Japanese airline in 1985, as it was descending and spiraling out of the sky, they took out these notepads, and they wrote letters to their loved ones. Over here, we have these letters that were found in the rubble of the Warsaw Ghetto as these Jewish people who were penned up there were being starved and beaten and executed. As they knew they were dying, they wrote these last letters and hid them with the hope that somebody, besides the Nazis in this case, would read their notes and know their story. You know, in that final moment, all the scaffolding of life gets stripped away. All these silly toys that we spend our lives chasing, the success, the reputation, the security, the wealth, the comfort, the ease, they mean nothing. And a person is left with what they really believe, what you really built your life on. If that moment were to come for you, and one day it will, I know that we sometimes spend a lot of our lives pretending like it won't come. I'm going to live forever. But recognize or not, that final moment will come. And if it were here for you right now, what would you write? What's the message you want to leave behind? What's your story really? You can go ahead and turn your Bibles right now to Daniel chapter 3. Because this moment came in the lives of three young men, possibly around the same age as Captain Klishkinov. You know, these young men of great promise, they've risen to positions of of eminence in the world's most powerful nation. They could look forward to great families, deeply fulfilling lives, doing noble things for their people and their God. Their hearts were full of hopes and dreams. And I'll tell you what's been so striking to me about this story, their story. Usually when this moment comes, when somebody realizes death is inescapable, nothing they can do about it, one of the things that's often expressed in those last messages is regret of having to leave life. But for these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, death was entirely escapable. After saying all they had to do was say the word, bend the knee, and their nightmare would be over. And their lives would be restored. Their positions of power given back to them, their honor and status. They are headed towards an unimaginably painful death. And one word would mean life for them, and they would not say it. They would not say that word. They would not bend that knee. Life or death, they chose death. Starting in verse 16 of Daniel chapter 3, we see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Those are what final words look like, by the way. And they kind of have that same vibe, don't they? Mustn't despair. Even if he doesn't, we're not despairing. You pick it up in verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. Sometimes this is translated, his expression of his face changed. When they were first brought before him and not bowing down, he was mad, but he was kind of using that velvet glove type of thing. He was kind of like, all right, guys, listen, we need you to bow down. How about this? When you hear the music and you hear the trumpets, you know, when the vibe hits you, when the mood gets you, just go and bow down. Just bow down. Just do your thing. It's fine. Worship the image I made. We're good. You can have everything back. But in the face of their unshakable devotion, their staggering commitment to face death rather than disobey God, Nebuchadnezzar loses control. His attitude towards them changed. He ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. The number 7 is often used in the ancient world as kind of like a metaphorical way of saying a lot. You see this in Proverbs. For a righteous man may fall 7 times and rise again. Again, lazy people may consider themselves smarter than not 1, not 2, but 7 wise counselors. Nebuchadnezzar is saying, I want you to crank that furnace up to the max. I want you to think for a moment about what they're facing and what Nebuchadnezzar is rushing them to. I'm sure most of you, if you've lived any amount of time in your life, you've burned yourself on a stove or with a lighter or a match or whatever, a candle. A few years ago, Tamara and I had the opportunity to go camping at the Herky Creek kind of memorial get-together camping thing. And ironically, we were supposed to have a surgery for Sawyer. We'd been in the hospital for so much time. This was Memorial Day, so end of May. We started in March in the hospital. And we had barely gotten out, and we were talking about not going until I finally told Tamara, I was like, I have to go, and Sawyer has to go. We've got to get away. We need a vacation. We postponed the surgery. The doctors were okay with it. The mental health kind of outweighed the urgency of his situation. But that being said, we kind of rushed into packing up and doing all this stuff. And we got this brand new burner, this Coleman burner 2 stove thing. And I'm thinking, I've seen these set up. How bad, how hard could this be? Nothing is ever straightforward when you want it to be straightforward. So it's cold. We're rushing to try to get this thing set up. You know, it's a lot of very choice words of encouragement. The pilot won't light. And finally, I look at Tamara and said, hey, do you want me to help you? No, I'm just kidding. This was me struggling with this entire time. I finally got it to light after an unhealthy amount of propane and did that whole full-blown see that explosion from space thing, singed my eyebrows, right? So I'm in pain, we also packed something else new. We got these really cool, what we thought were super slick pots and pans that compacted all together, like the Russian nesting dolls. They all fit together. They only came with one handle. So I'm trying to switch the handle from one thing to another, and it would have been easier to give 10 cats a bath at the same time. So finally, I give up, and I leave the handle on one thing, and I get a towel, and I'm holding it to stir the other pan. Well, I'm rushing, it's cold. Well, my eyebrows are not cold. Everything else on me is cold, and wouldn't you know it, some of you know where I'm going with this, I grab the pan without the towel, right where that stupid handle should have been. And I got a brand new, healthy respect for fire again. It hurt. It really, really hurt. But listen, in addition to this physical pain that can be involved with fire, you need to know that to deliberately burn someone to death is historically one of the most inhumane forms of execution. It involves treating a human being like an object, like a wooden stick just to be disposed of, so there won't even be a corpse left to mourn. And in the ancient world, that was a big deal. That was a really big deal. Historically, it's been reserved for witches, heretics, the people society wants to dispose of. And that's what these three men are waiting for. They're waiting to be thrown into these flames. This is the fate they face voluntarily, knowing that at any moment they could just save their own lives. You look at verse 21. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. Pay attention to that. We're going to come back to it later. These young men wearing their nice clothes and all this stuff. The king's command was so hurried, so urgent, and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These three men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. The writer wants us to understand some important details. He wants us to understand that Nebuchadnezzar's rage is so intense, the fact that he's killed some of his own men doesn't even register. This is not a story about people who run away from a lukewarm fire doing that, ooh. This is a raging inferno. There is no hope, humanly speaking, for these immobilized bodies being tossed into this fire. That's the setting. So stop again for a moment. Ask yourself, imagine as best you can the experience that these three men are facing, what their final moment looks like. They've been faithful to the very end. They probably knew from the very beginning when this idol and decree was created what they were facing. They've seen the end coming, and at every avenue and every exit door has been closed. They were faithful to the last. Even now, as they're carried to the furnace, these are real people filled with courage, maybe some fear, but defiance and faith. They probably felt that heat. They definitely would see the men collapse that were carrying them and die from this fire, and then they're in the fire. And they wait for the searing pain, for at least the smoke inhalation to choke them out, suffocate them, but it doesn't come. They don't feel any different. And it begins to dawn on them, maybe they're not even warm. No burns, no smoke. They're not even tied up anymore. They're walking around, and that's not even the best part. The best part is what happens that turns this from a miracle to a divine encounter. Look at verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement. Some of your translations will say trepidation, because with trepidation, there's a little bit of a sense of fear involved with that. And he asks his advisors, weren't there three men that we tied up and threw the fire? They replied, certainly, O king. How many times do you think Nebuchadnezzar heard that a day? They were well versed in saying, certainly, O king. He said, look, I see four men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the fourth looks like a son of the gods. There's a fourth member now of the Furnace Club, and he's unharmed. And apparently he's the one who delivered the other three. And it's convened a little meeting right there in the furnace. Who was this fourth man who appears from nowhere, can cheat death, and looks like an appearance of the Son of God? Well, it doesn't say explicitly, but I like to think that this is maybe Jesus. It sounds like the kind of thing he'd do. Certainly would, right? And they're walking around together, and they're spending some time together. Apparently, they're having the world's greatest life group in a furnace. They were going to have an open chair for a fifth person, but it burned up. I wonder what they said to each other. I wonder if the fourth man told them how proud the Father was of their loyalty and their bravery and their dedication and their love for him. I wonder if he told them that because of this one act of faithfulness, their names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, would be remembered for thousands of years throughout the history of the earth. 2.5 millennia later, opposite side of the world, different culture, different language, and yet we remember their names. I wonder if he told them that for centuries, all around the world, men and women who face suffering and persecution or even death would be immeasurably strengthened by hearing the story of what these men had done. What do you think they said to the fourth man? I'll bet you they poured out adoration and gratitude and wonder and worship like they had never done before. They withheld worshiping a false god, and they ended up worshiping the real God in a way that they had never done before, because worship is like that in the furnace. Because the furnace turned out to be the place where God was, where they met him. And that's the whole point of this story. They were hoping to get delivered from the furnace, but God decided to deliver them in the furnace. Sometimes God delivers people from the furnace, but sometimes he delivers people in the furnace. Jesus said to them what he says to people still today, I'll meet you in the furnace. Because he's a furnace kind of guy. The place where full devotion to God can lead you might just look scary and dangerous and painful, but maybe turned out to be where Jesus is. And turns out, amazingly enough, that was the safest place for them to be. You know, our focus this year at Canyon Church is to be engaged, and there will be a lot of lessons to come about what that means. But today what it means is don't be afraid of the furnace. Because if you end up avoiding it, you might just end up avoiding the adventure of a lifetime, the opportunity of a lifetime. Because Jesus says to people still today, I'll meet you in the furnace. You follow me, it's going to look dark, it's going to look dangerous, it's going to look scary. You keep following me, I'll meet you in the fire. And he says it still today. He's saying it to some of you now. Let's keep going to verse 26. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace. Now, again, it doesn't say this, but I guarantee he was standing a considerable distance away from it. Right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he shouted, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. I would have loved to see that walk. Heads held high, probably doing the arm swaying thing, like, you can't hurt us. No one can hurt us. God is with us. The satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their heads singed, unlike my eyebrows at camp. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. You remember verse 21? We saw the writer go into some details about the clothes they wore. Now, why would he do that? Because he has an eye for fashion? No, of course not. No. He wants us all to understand the extent of this miracle. Not only are they not harmed, not even their hairs, God protected their clothes. In fact, in verse 21, the descriptions of them are pretty obscure. They're kind of robust. There's a lot of different things, different translations. You see it handled by different translators. I like to think that the term translated robe may be a covering for an upper body garment that had this writing in Aramaic that said, the king threw me in the fire and all I got was this lousy robe. They came away with it with the clothes on their back, totally intact. Then King Nebuchadnezzar said, look at this, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command. Whose command? Nebuchadnezzar's command. The guy saying this. And were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. He wasn't a big freedom of religion type of guy. After this, he promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. He doesn't restore them. He doesn't just restore them. He lifts them up to new positions to serve, to contribute, to influence. Do you think about what the rest of their lives must have been like? We don't know. This is the last view we get of their lifetime. They're never mentioned again in Scripture, but I wonder, as they went through life, if they ever thought of how easily they might have missed this adventure. How they could have easily not engaged in the opportunity to obey and serve God, even when they were faced with an unimaginable death. If they had given in to fear, one word, one bent knee, they would have missed the chance to engage in the opportunity of their lives. They'd have missed this great encounter, the fourth man of the furnace. I wonder if when they were really old men, right, years later on the anniversary of the day, they would all meet together. They would get those same robes out. And, of course, their wives were like, I wish you'd get rid of that. It's out of style and it has holes in it. But they didn't. And they'd get together. And they remember the time that they were young men full of courage and faith, how they defied a king, walked around in open flames, and spent time in the presence of the living God. I'll bet they did. I bet they never forgot this moment, because I'll tell you something. If you've ever spent time in the furnace, if you've ever trusted God enough to go to the place that looks so frightening and so dangerous and so scary, if you ever trust him so fully that you refuse to bend the knee to any other god, you go to that place, you meet him there, I think it marks you. I think you carry that moment to your grave. Going into the furnace, which was probably the last thing they wanted to do, turned out to be the greatest moment of their lives. And ironically enough, the furnace, what looked like to be certain death, turned out to be the safest place of all. Why? Well, because God was there. Because again, God sometimes delivers people from the furnace, and sometimes he delivers people in the furnace. And I think the greatest of times of your lives will be when you find him in the furnace. I think there's a great danger facing Christ followers today. We're living in a world that's as comfortable as any time in the history of the world. And the danger is that the primary goal of our life becomes furnace avoidance. We pray, God, deliver me from pain and discomfort and suffering and inconvenience. Make my life smooth. Make my life easy. Make my life comfortable. Make it pleasant. Make it fun. Make it busy. Remove the obstacles from it. Maybe we could even avoid that, like a low flame. For us, the furnace came out of nowhere. I was thrown into a furnace with no warning. Sawyer came into mine and Tamara's life like a stick of dynamite dropped in a lake that's still and calm, and just, we had no idea this type of thing even existed. And people had a lot of advice for us, right? Just have faith. Some folks would say, just trust God, and he will make him better. And I know they meant well, and I know they were trying to comfort me. But we've seen a lot of surgeons over the years, and I'll be honest, I was always hoping for some kind of simple physical fix for Sawyer, a surgery to make all the chaos go away. And for the better part of 5 years, we rode a roller coaster of wins and losses when it came to Sawyer's health. There were times when it was scary, not because we were always necessary about losing him, even though we had those too, but rather because we were losing this picture-perfect life we wanted for our son. It's a very humbling thing for me to have all these setbacks. Prayed many times to God saying, please make this go away. We've been faithful, we've been trusting you, and he didn't. He didn't take it away. He didn't give us the fixes we wanted. And I'll tell you the passage of Scripture that really calms me about this. It's where Paul says in 2 Corinthians, he says that he was given a thorn in his flesh. And 3 times he pleaded with the Lord to take it away. And 3 times God says, no. And then he tells him this, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. God says to Paul, I'll meet you in the furnace. And if you know anything about Paul, he spent a lot of time in the furnace. And that's where God was. It's been that way in my life. Jesus saying, I'll meet you in the furnace. I won't deliver it from you. I'll deliver you in it. Day in and day out, we manage Sawyer's health. Through his weakness, though, we've come to find a strength that only comes from God. And please don't take away from this that, if you just trust in God, if you just have faith in Jesus, everything will be easy peasy and there won't be any pain. That's not what I'm saying. Hey, Joe. That's not what I'm saying at all. Sawyer, the other day, we were going through his routine at night, And he said the most heartbreaking thing. He didn't know it was heartbreaking at the time. He goes, Dad, I can't wait to get bigger. Oh, yeah? Why's that? So we don't have to do our flush anymore at night. Whew. To look at his little face and tell him, hey, bud, this is your life. The heartbreak and disappointment and pain, it's just, there's a weakness in me still that wants to make everything easy and perfect, but it's not something I can do, and it's not what God has planned, even if we ask him a lot more times than Paul asked God. Let me tell you that. I have to remember this strength is made perfect in weakness. It proves that the furnace is where we meet him still. And I was thinking about this message, and I was thinking about God having a calendar, and I know he doesn't. I know he's omnipresent and omniscient. I get that. But I had this picture of God having this calendar. And on the day for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego going before Nebuchadnezzar and defying him, I wonder if he had circled on there, meet them in the furnace at this day. But what if they hadn't shown up? Their whole lives, this incredible adventure, was dependent on that decision to engage in their faith, their willingness to face a furnace. And I was thinking about the rest of us. Where does God have on his calendar, I'll meet you in the furnace? And are we going to show up? Or will we bend the knee to the wrong God? So I'm going to ask you to do something dangerous, if you will. No one can force you to do this. This has to come from you. But I want you to consider this, that we stop asking for less heat, if that's what you've been asking for. We don't ask for an easier or more rich or more fun or more pleasant or more secure life, because God says there's something better for us if you just get in the furnace. It's amazing to me how much the human heart gets wrapped up and bound up and enslaved by such trivial things. Somebody cut me off on the freeway. Get all bent out of shape about that. Did my boss give me an angry look and hurt my feelings? Am I getting the recognition that I think I should from work, school, a special someone? Did I get an unexpected expense and now I can't afford this thing that I must possess? Did somebody create an obstacle in my life? Is church and living the life God is asking me getting in the way of me time? I'm telling you, I think we're being called to a deeper measure of devotion. So I want to ask you to consider to pray a dangerous prayer and ask God, God, give me an opportunity to show you my devotion to you. Give me that opportunity. And if you're not, you feel the honest truth, like my devotion level isn't there, then ask God why that is. That's okay. Be real. Be honest with yourself and find out, why am I not there? Ask God to show you the fourth person in the furnace. Somebody told me recently that they were praying to get to work in an easier environment. They said, oh, David, I work with fallen and difficult and cranky and hostile people all the time. And I said, well, so do I. And I said, those same people have to work with me. And in this world of fallen people that are difficult and cranky and hostile, maybe you have people in your work who are far from God and have habits or behaviors in your life that are really painful for you. I understand that. You know, Nebuchadnezzar probably wasn't up for Employer of the Year. He probably didn't make the Forbes top 100 greatest places to work. And God used Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's willingness to go into that furnace to change his heart. Often people get out of hard situations, and I don't know, maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. But maybe, just maybe, God has a plan, and that's to keep you right where you are, at least today, so he can use you. Maybe we need to stop praying for deliverance from the furnace and ask for the presence of God who meets people there. Maybe there's a Nebuchadnezzar that God wants to reach through us. So we ought to quit praying and trying to get away from that and ask God to meet us there. He says, I'll meet you in the furnace. Maybe God's been asking some of you to get involved in some form of service, whether that's here at church or in your city or in your community, or I don't know. Maybe he wants you to join that hostile, passive-aggressive, and completely irrational group of parents known as the PTA. I don't know. I don't know what he's asking you. Maybe he's asking you to start using some of your gifts that he's given you, and you're afraid or you're worried to do that. I'll tell you, that was me 2 years ago almost exactly. I remember I told Tamara and I told friends, I've signed up to preach. This is going to go one of two ways. Either this goes okay, and I do it every other-ish month, maybe once a quarter, or this goes horribly wrong and I never do it again. And God goes, there's actually a third door where you do it every week, and I'm going to push you through there. We can't keep avoiding what feels like the furnace because God is in the furnace. It could be a relationship that's the furnace for you. It could be a financial hardship, some sort of giving or sacrifice. I don't know. I just know the golden statue in our world tend to involve gods with names like comfort and ease and security and success and busyness and fun. And somewhere along the line, too many people and too many churches have gotten the idea following Christ has something to do with an easier life. So I'll put it to you in the form of a question. How many heroes of faith had easy lives? How many? In that great chapter in Hebrews, in the Hall of Fame of Faith, how many of them had easy lives? Where did Jesus say to his followers, God has a wonderful plan for your life? And guess what? It primarily includes a great house, an attractive spouse, a wonderful job, and a great-looking car, and just the most athletic and the smartest kids who have ever walked this earth, and it's just going to be this endless succession of easy days. Where did Jesus say that? What Jesus said to people is, follow me, and you're going to have a great big God on your side, and you're going to get to have a relationship with us, and you're going to have an eternal hope and some outrageous joy, but you're going to be in trouble some of the time. And those people, they followed him, and they walked the same path that he walked on. They followed him into the community. They followed him to the sacrifice, into the suffering, into the persecution. They followed him into death. You understand that we're here in this room because of, and this is a matter of historical fact and simple historical record, because throughout history, hundreds and thousands of people, of ordinary men and women, most of whose names have long since been forgotten, names and faces of people that will never be remembered in this world, said they were willing to go into the furnace because they love God that much. They said, I'll suffer. I'll give everything for you when I die. And when they did, their final moment came, which it will for all of us. When that moment came for them, there wasn't despair. God didn't forget them or overlook them or abandon them. God said the same thing he said to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and what he said to Stephen, who would go on to be the first person martyred for Christ, what he said to Peter, and what he said to Paul when they were persecuted and beaten and jailed and martyred as well. Same thing he said to William Tyndale, the man who decided, I got to translate the Bible to English. And he went and asked for permission. They said no, and he said, I'm going to do it anyways. And one of his friends betrayed him and killed him over that. He says it still today in China, in the Middle East, in Africa, and he's saying it to you today too. I'll meet you in the furnace. If you dare, I'll meet you there. This is your chance to engage. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they had their chance and took it. Daniel had his chance. Stephen had his chance. Peter and Paul had their chance. They had their day. When is your day? Our day will inevitably come, and I don't know what furnace you're facing. I don't know what this means for you, but I do know this. He will meet you there. If you haven't had the chance or opportunity to be baptized, do that before you go into the furnace. It's a good idea. It's a really good idea. If anyone has any needs, go ahead and let them know. Please come as we stand and sing.